Right. If you guys want to start, you can take a look. Your materials are here. The minutes from our last meeting way back last April are there if you want to take a look at those. The bylaws are here. We'll just go over those real quickly today. So you should have those in your packet if you want to take a look. Let's go for one more minute. We'll see if somebody else shows up. Yeah, we're small because we still have vacancies. We need more people.
Take space.
Yeah, it's not. We have lots of space. Well, let's go ahead and we'll get started. I'm Melanie Hadaway. We have some new members, so we'll do introductions here in just a moment. Thank you all for being here. Just a reminder that all of our meetings are recorded. So once the meeting starts, Jennifer hits play, and everything we say is kept in perpetuity for posterity. So I appreciate you all being here. We'll have Jennifer. So we'll call the meeting to order at 5:35. And Jennifer Morgan here, who is our secretary and the administrative assistant for the committee, will call roll call. And then we'll just go around, and since we have new people, we can introduce ourselves and who we are, and then we'll get started.
Okay.
All right, Jen.
So Paula Addis is absent. Tara Devon.
Here.
Jessica Eade is excused. Grant Guy.
Here.
Amy Hart.
Here.
Sharon Hildebrand is excused. Ernest Kincaid.
Here.
Earl Peterson.
Here.
Christina Sinclair.
Here.
Heather Stewart.
Here.
Timothy Dorn.
Present.
And Melanie Hadaway.
I am here. So welcome. I'm Melanie Hadaway. Come on in, Paula. We've got a spot for you here. We just took roll, so we'll let the minutes show that Paula Addis has joined us as well. Welcome, Paula. I'm Melanie Hadaway. I'm the Executive Director for Teaching and Learning. So I am assigned by the Superintendent to this administrative committee. So I will chair the committee. I work with Jennifer Morgan and at all of you to set the agenda. Jennifer is usually the contact who you get all the emails from. And I'm a non-voting member, so you are the folks who are here. And we'll talk a little bit about our purpose with new folks as we get to the bylaws. Bill, you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. Tim Doran, I'm on the board, and so the board rep on the committee. My term technically ends at the end of this month, and it's subject to reappointment by the president. We'll have a new president, and so I hope to continue after the first one. But this is my second year on the board, so soon to be my second term.
Exciting. Mr. Kincaid, do you want to go next? Tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I'm Ernest Kincaid, and I'm actually out from the house in Memphis.
You're an at-large community member.
After daily, I'm
okay.
at community.
At-large community members.
All right. Anything else you want to say, Mr. Peterson, or just that?
No, I'd like to save my comments for the end.
Okay. You'll remain an enigma for us.
Okay, well then, I've been on this committee since 2010.
Wow.
And came perilously close to getting off of it, but I managed to get back on it this year. And even though I changed jobs, I managed to stay on this committee. I am at large courthouse. And I guess I'm the fastest old guy bicyclist in the state, so.
All right.
At least the record book says that, so.
All right.
My name is Christina Sinclair. I'm also an at-large community member. I'm in the North Pole area, and I'm currently a stay-at-home mom of that little boy there.
Awesome. Civic engagement early. We like that. Thank you for joining our committee.
Heather Stewart, I'm the principal at Ryan Middle School, and I am the middle school principal representative.
I'm Amy Hart. I have a kiddo at Watershed and a kiddo at Dewey.
Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Grant Guy, elementary principal rep. I'm the principal at Wood River Elementary, where my two kids go to school.
Thank you.
Tara Devon. I'm a teacher out at Den Eielson Middle School and High School.
Paula Addis. I'm a teacher at Pearl Creek, appointed by FEA with Sarah.
All right.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it? Okay.
Jen Morgan, and I'm with Teaching and Learning for about 4 years now. And I'm your point of contact for the committee.
All right. So our first item of business is an approval of the agenda, if there is a motion to do so.
Motion.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. Is there discussion on the agenda? So all in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, please say nay. We have approved our agenda. We are rolling along. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes. And I know not all of you were here in April, but hopefully you got a chance to take a look at what we talked about and what our major points were. We reviewed the world language curriculum, which we adopted last spring. And when someone is ready, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. So we have a motion to approve the minutes. A second from Mr. Kincaid. Do you need more time to look or any discussion? All right. All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. All right. We're on to item number D, which is a committee overview. So I just wanted to point out that each of you should, on your agenda, there's a sticker up on the corner that tells you your position and your term. We have our appointed members, so from FEA and from Fairbanks Principals Association are appointed yearly, although they may continue for 2 years. Our elected positions, or selected positions from our community are staggered 1 and 2 year terms. And we purposely try to stagger that so that we can maintain some historical knowledge on the board and not everybody is coming and going at the same point. So as members come on, those are either 1 year or 2 year positions. We have the bylaws attached, and I just wanted to give a chance to folks to take a look. The Curriculum Advisory Committee is an administrative committee, and it's under one of our school board policies 236, which is the policy to advise administration and the school board. We deal with curriculum development, which are policies in Chapter 9 around curriculum development, and those are there. If anyone ever wants to look up board policies, you can do so by going to our school board, our school district website. And under the school board, there's a link to policies and regulations, and it takes you to what is called board docs, which is where we store all of those. So you can go in there and look if you're into lots of policies that I think sometimes people don't always look at, but you can search by topics, or you can look for keywords, or you can sort of look at the different pieces of that policy. Administrative regulations are also there. Policy is runs through the school board, and it tends to be sort of the higher level direction, whereas administrative regulations are run through a process that ends with the superintendent, and those provide some of the details. Administrative regulation tends to be a little bit more fluid, so if you needed to change a form or things, whereas policy is a more formal direction setting. Right. Fine. I'm looking at Mr. Doran in case I get that wrong. So it talks about our membership. We actually have some vacant positions. We currently have 1 parent position and 3 community at-large positions that we are still recruiting for. And we were able to get our new members, which we're totally excited about. So be willing, tell your friends and neighbors if they are interested in joining the committee. We are still looking for membership. And we have applications. I can even give you some to take, or they're also online. So again, I really encourage that. This is a pretty vibrant, fun committee. I think we have good discussions around good things. So if you know folks who want to participate, please spread the word. So the next on the bylaws talks about the length of terms, which is that staggered term. Voting committee members cannot serve longer than 4 consecutive years without going off. So that's something that, if at the end of a 2-year term, if you were selected when we, then you'll have to go off for a year and then be able to come back on. So the staff to the committee right now is myself and Jennifer Morgan. We're assigned by the superintendent. We tend to meet, we schedule our meetings basically once per month during the school year. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a moment. We are not required to have a quorum, but we really do try to make sure we have enough people here, especially when we get to the spring when we start looking at making recommendations around curriculum. So it's really nice if you're not able to be here to let Jennifer and I know, but we hope that by having the schedule published, come on in, Faye. Hi. That we hope that people are able to make those meetings. And attendance, one of if a member misses more than 50%, then we look at the possibility of dismissing. So Ms. Faye, we should talk about whether you want to continue on the committee. Oh. So if you wanted to join us right now, you can either sit with the guest or I think it would probably be okay if you sat at the end as well. So, Faye has been, for those of you who don't know, Ms. Seymour has been on the committee for a while and has been on the committee in prior years. So we're glad to see you. So we really do ask that you make the meetings. There was a question about whether you're excused or unexcused. Excused is nice if we know you're not going to be here. We won't wait for you. But we're still wanting to make that 50% threshold. So we'd really like everyone to make at least 50% of the meetings, hopefully more. And our scope of responsibilities is there. In general, we participate in the curriculum revision process. And we'll talk coming up later in the agenda about the curricula that are in the process for this year. And then also on materials. So those are sort of the big purviews of what we look at. And then all of our notes, we don't necessarily do minutes like we used to, but the recordings of the meetings are posted on the district website so that you can go back and listen to them, and other people can as well. So if there are questions, yes, sir. Yep.
I just want to make note of the scope of responsibilities regarding all aspects of curriculum development, and much of it may be around the materials or the curriculum itself, which are separate items, but there are also curriculum-related topics that, especially from the board, we may want to get some input from. Last year, this committee talked about grading and getting some input on that, and so there are a variety of topics that are related to curriculum that's beyond just what we're teaching and what materials we're using. So.
And that I think
that's important to keep in mind.
And I think, Mr. Doran, that would be something that perhaps would be worth a conversation with the superintendent. So as I have clarified today, we're really going to focus on the what, and materials do come into that, but generally we tend to talk about curriculum and instruction a little bit separately. So we'll see how that plays out. Questions on the bylaws, about the scope of our work, how we work? So on our schedule, while we're talking just about the sort of the committee overview, are our scheduled meetings. So we have meetings scheduled right now for November, and we typically schedule a tentative meeting in December as well. That meeting has historically often not happened either due to bad weather or due to sort of lack of an agenda. So at the end of the meeting, I think we should talk about whether or not we want to meet in November and December, if there is enough meat, if we'll have sort of agenda items to bring up. So that'll be something I think for us to talk about. You guys can consider that as well. So any other questions on the bylaws, just making sure folks know. All right. So item number E is the curriculum revision process. And I want to go over sort of how we are approaching revising curriculum, sort of how that process has worked, and then what we're looking at changing perhaps in the future. So historically, our curriculum has looked at a 6-year cycle, and the legislature requires a review. I believe they changed it actually last year to every 10 years, but before that it was every 5. So we've had this historical sort of every 6 years we pull out the curriculum and make sure it gets a comprehensive review. That process usually takes between a year and 2 years, depending on the curriculum. PE and health, for example, went pretty quickly. Math, the last time we looked at that in 2013 and 14 was a lengthy process, and it underwent a whole bunch of revisions. So it kind of depends on which curriculum we look at. We had briefly, with our prior superintendent, looked at a process called content leadership teams, where instead of the curriculum department leading the curriculum discussion, principals were assigned to different committees, and principals led that discussion, hoping that it would sort of help bring a more one of the goals was a more responsive process, so that we're not waiting 6 years to address curriculum issues that we need to look at. With the transition to the current superintendent, there was sort of it was sort of mushy in terms of where are we at, how are we providing for some of those goals. So with that being said, last spring our department underwent, we started a comprehensive process for looking at curriculum. We did a survey, and I'm going to share with you some of the work that we did. If all my technology works, let's see where we're at. Look at that. So Mr. Dorn, we're going to have to slide a little bit. So we started what I sort of called the curriculum project, and I wanted to really look at all of our processes and try to figure out, are we meeting the needs of teachers? Are we meeting the needs of students and parents? Is it clear to people? I know that there were times it wasn't really clear to me as we looked at this transition from the leadership teams to the curriculum process. And so really we started, this became really a focus as our district started looking about talking about personalized learning. When we talk about meeting students' needs of pace, place, and path, and helping a student learn, not necessarily, just because you're an 8-year-old means that you have to spend this many months in 3rd grade, but looking at things differently, then the curriculum becomes really the center in terms of what do we expect kids to learn, where is their flexibility, where is there not flexibility. So we started to get a lot of those questions. So really our questions that sort of drove this were, what are the expectations for following the adopted curriculum? I mean, that was one of the questions with personalized learning, and that came up is, this isn't adopted by the school board. The school board says this is our 3rd grade math curriculum, and this is what students will, teachers will teach, and hopefully students will learn. So where is their flexibility if the school board has adopted that document? Pacing guides, especially, in many of our subjects, the idea is that by this, you've covered these chapters in the first quarter, and then you do these chapters, and by November 15th, you should be here. Well, if we're personalizing, allowing students that pace, then do we have to follow the pacing guides? And especially for teachers who like structure, I was a teacher, I like structure, I like to follow rules. Here's the pacing guide of the curriculum. How am I going to get in trouble if I don't follow the pacing guide? So we had that real question. Farther down, and I think this goes to Mr. Dorn's point, is while we're talking about curriculum, there's implications in what we ask kids to teach or to learn as students to teach, and sort of the how. So thinking about how is that connection, and is the what of curriculum really tying into what's happening in classrooms? How do we put the needs of a learner first and still exist as a system? One of the things that we talked about many years ago, when I first came into the district, for example, there was which is not that old, there was a different curriculum at Lathrop. Our English curriculum was a different curriculum than West Valley. We had English 9, they had an English 1. It was a different curriculum. Our English 9 was different than the English 9 at North Pole. And the feedback that we have gotten over the years is that if a kid goes from Eielson to Lathrop and they're in 10th grade English, then shouldn't 10th grade English kind of be 10th grade English, right? So how do we ensure some continuity as a system but still let teachers personalize for kids? And we have a lot of kids who move a lot of places. And I know that elementary especially, they talk about kids going from one school to another and making sure that we don't put kids at a disadvantage because they decide to move from Wood River to Weller. And then my big question is, are our processes supportive of all of this, or are our processes confusing? Are our processes helping, or are our processes hindering? So we did a current state. We surveyed all the elementary teachers and administrators. We got a little over 200 responses, about 260. We conducted 34 interviews with a whole mix of folks, new teachers, veteran teachers, math teachers, sped teachers, music teachers. And then we spent a lot of time going through all of those results trying to figure out what were the common threads, were there key themes, were there, sort of what did it all have to say. So that was our work last spring. And we really found a couple of different recurring ideas. One is that when people talk about curriculum, everybody's talking about something different. So when I talk about curriculum, I'm talking about what do we want kids to learn. Another person may talk about curriculum as the textbook they use. Somebody else talks about curriculum as the standards. So there's a lot of, what are we talking about when we talk about curriculum? Lack of philosophical and structural alignment. And this covers a lot of different things. My favorite were two teachers in the same building who put their name on here. And one said, well, I have always been told by my principal that we have to use all of the district adopted materials and follow the pacing guide, or else we'll get in trouble. I think there's the curriculum police, they'll come after you. Their teaching partner next door, who turned in the survey, said, yeah, I think we have a textbook somewhere, but I never use it, right? So even two teachers in the same building having very different perceptions of what's the expectation. And then how does our curriculum match what we want for kids? Our processes are too slow. We don't have that responsive piece. So that's been a big goal for me, is how do we have our responsive need to teachers? Clarification about where are parameters. Where do teachers have autonomy to make decisions, and where are baselines that we sort of have those expectations? So where is that line? It was clear that teachers lack trust in the way curriculum is managed. I think one of the comments was, well, certain teachers go down to downtown and they want a certain thing, and that's what happens. I give input and no one listened. So that to me, it says that we need to do a better job with communication and how all of that works. Communication comes back, and then again, sort of like a number 4, the non-negotiables are fuzzy. Where is there room and where is there not? If the school board has adopted this, is it a suggestion or is it an expectation? So we really noticed all of these and came up with sort of 3 recommendations. One is that we need to define a base, but also provide room for autonomy. So we need to be able to say, here are the non-negotiables, is sort of the word I use, here's the guardrails, and here's where you can have that freedom. We need to really make sure we define, and I think we needed to recreate some processes. If you want to change the curriculum, if you feel like it's not relevant, if you want a different textbook, how do you do that? How do you bring that to happen? And then how do we communicate that key information? And I should say, if you have questions, I'm going to sort of try to I'm going to ask you guys some questions, but I just was sort of trying to give the overview. Does it make sense so far? And these are Excuse me.
I was just thinking in terms of the stuff on the website. Will we get a copy of this?
I can share a copy with you. This is just sort of the working draft within the teaching and learning department. These are the things that we're in the process of trying to do with. So, for example, short term, what is our first goal going to be? Where do we want to be a year from now, 2 years from now? So some of those kind of things. Do we need to revise the curriculum adoption processes? So do we need to revise? What do we want it to be? Does it match our current policy or administrative regulation? Do we need to change it? Where is that going to go? So the guiding principles, and these really are from the teaching and learning department, but based on the strategic plan of the school board. And the first is that we need to have students at the center of our decisions. So looking at the at the curriculum, which we define as the learning objectives, so what we want students to know, understand, and be able to do, that it needs to start with students. That we support personalized learning, so we need to make sure that our curriculum allows for that flexibility for students to be able to access curriculum as they need to access it. That ultimately it's the teacher, the professional in the classroom who decides on the right mix of curriculum, instructional practice, materials, to be able to make sure that that happens. We do believe that equity, and the school board's mission is equity and excellence for all, that equity is maintained through that teaching of the standards and maintaining that baseline. So I don't want us to go back to that day where a student who's taking 9th grade English at North Pole High School and a student who's taking 9th grade English at Latham High School may or may not be studying the same things. That that we are a system of schools. So how do we maintain that? And that teachers are professionals with different needs. So as we communicate this information and as we package this information, for example, in curriculum guides, we need to think about those different levels of teacher need. So this is sort of just an overview of how we are thinking about it in terms of the student needs, the teacher preference, and teacher practice. And we really see it wanting to make sure that our communication and how we package curriculum supports teachers who really like structure. And sometimes those are our new teachers who are brand new, and they want to, I'd like a textbook, I'd like a pacing guide, help me, give me resources to make sure I can survive this. And sometimes they're not new teachers. Sometimes we have veteran teachers who like that. And we have others who want more flexibility. So trying to make sure we sort of have that range as we put together our curriculum materials. So that's not necessarily a change in what we're asking students, but it's a change for our department in terms of how do we package it. We've typically done one sort of curriculum guide and they all kind of look alike. So maybe our science one needs to look really different than our math one needs to look different than our art one. So moving through that. This slide I know is small, but this is basically how we're going to be looking at putting this sort of up in communication on our teaching and learning website. And I refer this to as our curriculum blueprint. So thinking about our curriculum in terms of what's the baseline, what are all of the resources that go with that, and then how are the processes around curriculum, how do those work? So I want, and we heard very clearly from teachers, I don't want to have to go to one place for the curriculum guide, another place to look at the achievement levels for the standards, someplace else to find the guide to the textbook lessons. Here's where I go for my online. Like, if we can get that in one spot, that would be good, which makes sense. So we're experimenting with what that might look like in terms of how do we help get it all in one place. The other piece that's big for me is that while we want to keep this sort of 6-year, we need to make sure we do a comprehensive review, bringing in processes on a shorter term. So we're really, we can handle the 6-year curriculum, we've got some experience with that, but that, and in this slide it still says quarterly, but we're really looking at sort of like a twice-a-year check of some kind. How do we sort of do a check-in to make sure that things are going the way they need to go? And then figuring out a path for some ongoing responsiveness. So for right now, example, our English language arts materials were updated. The previous ones became out of date. So we're touching base. We have classes going on with teachers for journeys where our hope is to get good information. And it might be, man, we're on unit 4 and the stories are lame. We need better stories in unit 4. So how do we get that information so that we can say, okay, there's a need, let's find some better stories and get it back to teachers. So that ongoing responsiveness is that's one of the goals for this year especially.
Can you back up this slide?
Yeah. This one? This is the crazy slide. I know it's crazy to look at. So again, the top part, when we get it figured out, this top part will be sort of the big links to like the curriculum guides, some of the big assessment information. The middle part is where we see sort of those, the resources that are available for that. And then the bottom is just a reminder of our processes, and probably, we were thinking about these will link out either to the timelines or to the schedule and plans. We're not sure exactly what this will look like yet. Yes, sir. Earl. Oh, Mr. Jordan?
Just a quick, Core 4 is referencing the Core 4 for personalized learning?
Yes.
The
The Core 4 of personalized
just
learning.
want to make sure.
Yep.
For instructional materials, it says teachers must use.
Right. And
Either
that meets these
district
criteria,
adopted materials or,
and there's nothing there.
well, but it says or materials that meet these criteria. Who makes that decision?
Well, that's a good question. We're not there yet, Mr. P. That's part of why I'm sort of bringing this here. That the feedback we got very clearly from teachers is that sometimes, so the one example I'm thinking of is a veteran teacher who's been a specialist in reading. She's a very good reading teacher, and she's like, I'm not using that materials. I'm using these for my students. We've historically said you have to use these materials, and what's happened is we've had teachers who have said, I'll use the materials, but in reality they're not. So my feeling is, let's call it for what it is, and say, if learning is happening and you're a teacher, I think personally that's more of a principal decision, as long as the what and the kids are learning, but that'll be something that will come forth. And where this goes, there's parts of this that are pretty easy, that don't require any kind of policy or AR change, they're just processes. But the point you brought, and you'll notice there's nothing here, because we don't know yet what those criteria would be, that will be something that we'll have to be looking at. That's a bigger decision than just my department. Mr. Guy, did you want to add something?
I can give an example of that. So we have a Alaska history requirement for graduation, but there is no general textbook that exists that teaches every element of those standards. And so you might have to go and find material elsewhere that may not be a part of our adopted textbooks to teach the material that the state is requiring that you teach.
Right.
But it also, the way that that's written, creates a situation where the teacher must use the materials or materials that meet that. That gives the teacher the ability to say, I'm not using that textbook. And it just opens the door to whatever. And
Yeah.
so,
I think that there's a lot of different opinions about that, Mr. Peterson, and that'll be something that I think will come back and will have to be discussed. Mr. Doherty, do you want to add?
I was just going to add another aspect of that sometimes our adopted materials are the best overall adopted materials, but they may be elements that it is weak in how it presents it. And so on one hand, it's a supplemental we may be looking for, but on the other hand, it may be we want a material that really addresses the needs that are there. And I can think of a math example, I can think of a language arts example, but sometimes materials in their entirety have maybe a weak area, and teachers recognize that with their kids, and they need to be able to pick it up.
And for full disclosure, my hope is that my plan is to not make radical change, but in January we're going to start some new curricula on our agenda, and to start to answer some of these questions as we get to those curricula. So not to try to go back and retroactively say, hey, we've adopted math, you don't have to use your math stuff. But as we move forward, let's talk about some of these issues and see sort of what comes. It's sort of my way of thinking of it.
I think part of it is that, I'm a professional, and I feel like I should be able to make some judgments in the classroom if I have material that's not meeting my students' needs. And I feel like I should be trusted with that.
Yeah, so that's...
Well, yeah, and some of it is, I can think of social studies, I can think of reading. If my student who is a second grader can't read the second grade textbook that I have, am I going to force them to read a book that's not at their level, or am I going to supplement with other things that I've found? And in social studies we are teaching, we teach Alaskan history. In third grade, we don't have a social studies textbook that gives us information, so it's all supplemental. The textbook I have says Alaska became a state in 1949. That's it. That's all it says. that doesn't help me teach Alaska history very well. So.
And I think there's a lot of questions about what's adopted.
59. 59. What did I say? 49. 59.
So again, I think these are the kind of issues that as we go forward, these are the questions teachers are asking. So, I think as we move forward, those are the kind of questions we'll have to address. So that's coming forward. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking your point, Earl, on that is I really like how you outlining these types of things. That piece is perhaps as you go through it's a process, it's a developmental process or ongoing process, but that it does really say that meet these criteria, and you don't know what you say. Yes, you have a link that would go in there hitting the criteria, which is I think that it's some ways in between giving teachers, making sure they have empowerment, principals have empowerment, and within schools personalizing it for students and meeting their needs, and also having some clarity for discussion.
And I think the feedback we got from teachers in schools last year was that I think the other piece is that we need to look, as we move forward, we need to look at each subject perhaps a little bit more, what makes sense in English may be different than what makes sense in math and in a different one. So, and so again, the idea is as we go forward, we'll address some of these. There's no intention to sort of say, we're going to do these cool things and now go back and retroactively make people change what they're doing. So, Mr. Guy.
I like the fact that we're thinking about adding links and bookmarks to supplemental selections, because sometimes teachers just don't even know where to find that information. So where do I start? I had that question earlier this year. Mm-hmm. Where do I go to get this information on Alaska history? It's, okay, let's go look in our book room, but this may give you some of it, but it's not going to give you all of it. So when teachers are sharing that information with each other, and save hopefully people time in that, and then curriculum department get a chance to look at that and then make sure that is in fact good material. So.
And that's our biggest hope with this slide is I want to be able to say I'm a third grade teacher. Yep. I want to go to one spot, or I'm a middle school science teacher. So again, this is a prototype. So we'll see.
And I think the way you went about it for health teachers might be a good process where they, because we do want to make sure that I'm just not pulling out my favorite dinosaur lesson that isn't relevant to the grade I'm teaching, but it's a lesson I like to teach. But where there needs to be some sort of a checks and balances, whether it be at the building level or the downtown level, or at the I know with the health curriculum and all the it needed board approval. But I agree, teachers are professionals, and they need to have some discretion in what they're doing.
And I'll be very honest that from my point of view, from a curriculum point of view, what I want is when our board adopts a curriculum that says these are the things we think are important for kids to learn, I want to know, are the kids learning those things?
Right.
And if a teacher is using something different, but the kids are learning, to me that's a different conversation than I'm using whatever I want to use and my kids aren't learning. And I don't know if that's a district decision or a school decision. So those are things that will happen again as this process moves forward. I don't have answers to all of this. I just feel like our role in teaching and learning is to look at board direction in terms of here's what we want kids to learn, but also to look at and listen to the feedback from schools about this is what we want to do to best serve our kids. So this is kind of where I'm trying this out on you guys, so we're getting good notes, so we'll see where it goes. So again, coming back to this, my goal is for this year is to really set up a system for this ongoing responsiveness. And Jen and I have been talking about some different ways that we can start to do that. And from what I want to be able to do is make sure as well is that if a teacher says I have a need and they have one place to go and say, I don't have social studies textbooks or materials, I'm a brand new teacher in 4th grade, help. I want to make sure that we can close that loop and that they get help and that they don't feel like they just emailed some random person and no one got back to them. So that's my goal, sort of help that loop there. This is just sort of how I'm starting to think about those 3 different levels of sort of that big 6-year, which is an extended process that we sort of lead out of the curriculum office, teaching and learning. trying to figure out what might that yearly check-in look like. And again, I'm not sure with all of this. This is just pieces that we're looking at, and then trying to make sure we sort of have that ongoing responsiveness. And what I have found, I have a coordinator in our department who always says, you inspect what you expect, or that you expect what you somehow those go back and forth. So for me, what I wanted to put like in those activities, those are for us in teaching and learning to make sure if we say we're going to do this, we got to make sure we're going to do it. So that's more what those are than any kind of, anything else. Another way to, sort of just another visual of the process, sort of like the 6 year is the extended. That's really where we do that review and research. And this is where I'm going to ask you guys to do some work today, is our 6 year process has historically started with teachers. And teachers typically come in, they look at the curriculum, decide what they think is working, not working, make suggestions for revision, that goes through some drafts, and then it goes out to the public for community input. The message that I've heard very clearly, this is my 4th year as the executive director, is that our community, our stakeholders, have pretty strong feelings about what they want our kids to be learning. Like, I'll use social studies, Alaska Studies as an example. I've had great conversations with some of our tribal organizations about what should Alaska Studies mean in Fairbanks schools. And so my goal is to figure out how do we bring that input and that feedback into the beginning of the process, as opposed to at the very end of the process. So how do we start to talk about some of those bigger things about what does our community expect and want from our curriculum early in the process? I'm not sure yet how to do that. But that's I think would be beneficial. Again, those 2 year processes, which really I think helping support schools. I think a lot of that happens at the school level, where you have teachers who decide, we really like this unit, we're going to do this instead. In October we're going to spend time on Indigenous people, and we're going to do a big thematic project, and our language arts is going to come in with that. So supporting principals at the schools to be able to do that work, and then that regular process that you hear in terms of how do we make sure that we have that regular feedback. So next steps, my goal is in January to sort of open up or to begin the process for secondary language arts and with K-12 social studies. I keep telling myself if I say it out loud and publish it, it will really happen, right? Because January seems a lot closer than it did when I started thinking about this. But we just looked at new materials with elementary language arts. I don't want to torture them by having something new come onto their plate. But we haven't looked at secondary English language arts since 2011 and 2012, so it's been a while. And then K-12 social studies. And again, that was a 2011-12 adoption, but social studies is where I have had a lot of feedback. Every time Dr. Gaborik has had a community focus group or the student achievement group, social studies is what comes up. What does it mean to be civically engaged? What does it mean to be a good citizen? How do we help our kids know their rights as voters? So social studies is an area that we've had a lot of feedback from the community and it's time. So those are the places that I'm thinking we'll start. Yes, Mr. Guy?
Can I just clarify,
yes.
On our agenda, it says spring 2019 K-12 language arts. Should that say secondary?
It should say secondary. Thank you for catching that.
Social studies.
And K-12 social studies.
All down. Okay.
Good job. If you were in my classroom, you would get extra credit for finding a typo of the teacher. So,
lots of practice.
Our other goal is to that curriculum blueprint, that page that had the small page with all the links, is to start trying to get some of those together. We'll start with elementary language arts and trying to build that and what might that look like and how does that work and get feedback from teachers there. The district has a piece of software called Let's Talk, which they've used. I don't know if any of you have given feedback on the K-12 magnet school. So it's on the board. There's a button you can hit on the school board page. So Jennifer and I have just met with the communications department about trying to figure out if we can utilize that software to create a place where teachers can have a curriculum question, response, need, feedback area. And what I like about it is it lets me see, here's what came in, and it's assigned to a person on our team, and I can see that they responded and check what went back out. So I want to make sure that we're sort of closing that loop. So Jennifer and I are working on that. And then the other piece that is just a curriculum piece, but looking at our pilot course process. Right now, it takes about 1.5 years, our current between a teacher saying, I want to do a pilot, or a school saying we want to teach a new class, and the actual being able to implement that. And so the feedback we've gotten from schools is that it'd be nice to have a faster process. That process is, we don't even know staffing for 2 years down the road. So trying to come up with a pilot class that we may not have anybody to teach. Or we might find out we have a Chinese teacher at our school and interest, and we could teach a Chinese class, but we don't have a middle school Chinese class in the curriculum. So trying to shorten that process. So again, where that will go, I don't know. That's just on my to-do list. All right. So this is where so as we go forward, these are sort of the big questions that I guess I would like you guys to start thinking about. And I would ask that if you have thoughts, feelings, input, feedback, we'll have this on our future agendas, but also feel free to email me anytime or to talk with your friends and colleagues. Because to me, these are sort of the big questions in terms of making sure that we are having, I think, the best educational experience for our students. There's other big questions, but these are just mine. So how do we start, as I said, shift that process so that we really are getting this community stakeholder input at the beginning? We don't always have great luck when we invite people to nighttime meetings. So I don't know that that's always the best way. But I think it's important that as we go into curriculum revision to get an idea of what does our curriculum expect students to know about, being an engaged citizen in Fairbanks, Alaska. The other issue that comes up is how does curriculum address non-academic or cross-content skills? So we oftentimes hear, I also work with career tech education, and employers and businesses through our Career Tech Education Advisory Committee tell us we want students who can collaborate, who can problem solve. We want students who have an awareness of and tolerance for difference and sort of all of these things. That doesn't really fall in any curriculum. And if you come back to that idea of you inspect what you expect, if we want kids to have those traits and those skills and they're not in the curriculum, how does that work? I don't have any answer to that one. But I think it's a question that I get in my department that I'd like us, as we move forward, to think about. And then I think the bigger piece is what are the knowledge, what's the understanding, what are the skills that we want a graduate to have, and then how do we make sure that our curriculum supports that? And so for full disclosure, the example I use is I was an English teacher, and I love to teach Brit Lit and Shakespeare. And I can tell you why Shakespeare is good for you, and I can make it interesting and exciting. I mean, sex and violence and defining your parents. We all love Shakespeare. But should passing Brit Lit be what determines, should we deny a kid a diploma because they didn't pass a World Lit class or a Brit Lit class? I don't know. Again, I don't have an answer, but I think we need to examine some of these questions as we build a curriculum. So these are sort of those high-level things, and I think that we, as we move forward and as we look at creating process and we look at opening up some other curricula, these are the kind of things that I ponder at night. So those are there. So I'm going to finish, and then I'm going to have you guys do some talk to your partner kind of stuff, and then I'll promise you I won't keep you here late. We'll be quick. But just 2 quotes. One from Alvin Toffler that talks about how the illiterate of the 21st century will be not those who cannot read, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And to me, it goes right with the second idea of we're preparing students for jobs that don't exist, using technologies that we don't even know that haven't been invented. So as we build that curriculum of what do we want kids to know coming out of our system, how are we planning for that? So I'm going to show you a video, and then we're going to do a little bit of table talk, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item. So, I don't know that, I mean, it's a video. I don't know that it's all accurate or not accurate, but it's definitely some stuff to think about. So, what I'm going to do is take it back to this sort of question, and then I'll give you guys about, a minute or so. We can have some think time, and then I'm just going to talk to your neighbor, and what do you think? I mean, in terms of the curriculum process of what do we want kids to know, and sort of how we've talked about some of these things, just what thoughts you might have. So I'll give you a minute, and then we'll go from there.
Can you go to full screen?
I'm trying to figure out, Heather, exactly how, and I should make it, oh wait, exit, let me try that. Follow the directions. This is why. There we go. And then when you're ready, just take a minute and talk to your partner, see if there's any good stuff, any advice you have for us in the teaching and learning department about how to make all this good stuff happen. Yeah, just talk to your neighbor. I'll come down and talk to you, Faye. You can figure out by yourself, or you can join another group.
Yeah. Do it. Right. That's what it's laborious. Yeah. It's almost so maybe it's not so much at the beginning of the process, it's maybe that they're reading back through the whole curriculum. But is it trying to just get some input on like that last piece, right?
Yeah, what's important?
What's important? Yeah. But I think the question still is like when the survey comes out.
Mr. Jones, you're out by yourself. You can join somebody, or you can ponder.
We send out a parent. Like, I mean, it's not about like the school climate studies when we send them out at trials and they're out at parent-teacher conferences, and our return rate is ridiculous. Right. And so how do we get it to be?
Oh, working
not just
Right. Yeah. They want their own agenda. How are we getting a good cross section, right?
Yeah.
Like that input should be kind of the same demographic as our community. So how do we guarantee?
How do we make sure we're getting
that we're getting pockets? I feel like it's almost going to be a bigger. Right? Like,
my goal right now is
posting.
So trying to think about
AFN are we getting in that?
secondary language arts and studies like a table.
Can we have a table? That's what I'm saying.
That's sort of social studies a lot. In the middle, I think there's a lot of good options.
And then what I want academic is.
In our original curriculum model in the license that's adopted in the regulation, spent a whole year on it. I mean, I'm really going to, I think that's going to answer start right like that process and spend some time with them, which we haven't done.
Yeah,
that means nothing really definitive. Even the current trend and those you could have, you spent a lot of time talking with experts, and there would have to be Jesus. It was really teach. Yeah, right. And my resolution, I want to do research on this. Here's my idea. But I think it'd be really what we're teaching. And I wanted to show the teachers through our content. I love my studies. So our content.
So we have a baseline content. So what you're getting is what's the skills that a person needs to survive in this world, but we don't know what to have.
Actually, the video, there's some things in the video that you just kind of but I'm trying to think about various things for the world that they're going to have, not the world.
Down here.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what I feel like that middle bullet where you start with that middle bullet is like
Right.
out to the kids and like the kids that the maintenance
I think so. What are we outreach that gives, community, maybe what we want is our graduates to have. What's the, turnout rate? Depending on the school. Oh, yeah, way better. And that was 90%. Right. Can it be that?
Yeah, and that's, I think we have, and I think as
but that's what they get good. Like, why can't we get all about giving them a senior diploma. Yeah. Yep. Hopefully that's us. Let's do it. Yeah. But here, like, where do you want your child? What skills do you want your child to have? I don't know about the knowledge. I'm not with knowledge. It's a hard thing. Understanding. I can do it. Understanding.
well, we were sent by our.
I feel like basic. Like they need to. Yeah, there's so different. The history of the United States.
Oh. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna wrap it up. I'm sure. Hopefully, you guys are having a good conversation. And I mean, you don't have to like finish up. I'm not trying to cut you mid sentence, Miss Addis. But so I just wanted you guys to sort of know. I mean, you are the curriculum advisory committee, and you establish those parameters. You don't establish, but you work with it, and you help guide us through those processes of what do we want our kids to know. That's the curriculum revision piece. And so, as we move through that and making sure that you guys are involved in that process, I wanted you guys to sort of know here's where we're sort of thinking. Again, there's a lot of unknowns still. I don't know. Mr. Dory just said, well, what about the middle piece? And I'm like, not there yet. I'm just trying to look at January. But so that input in terms of how do we to do some of this. So that's kind of where we're at. Anyone want to share out any like profound thoughts or questions that came out or?
I'm just looking at that first bullet because I think that first bullet for me would be the place to start. And how do you get that input? You know, if I can send out surveys, I can send out Twitter feeds, I can send out Facebook links, I can send all that out, email. And how do I get that input from my parents? And I was talking here that the time when I get the most parents in the building are when the kids are doing something. So it's setting up a platform or a system where and it has to be quick. Maybe a voting booth, kind of set up where they can go in on a tablet, hit through some questions. Because that's the part that, as a building principal, I struggle with, is getting families into the building. And I think the same holds true for our community members and our other stakeholders. It's not that they don't want to provide us feedback. Sometimes it's too cumbersome to do it.
Right.
And so, for me, that part. And I think if we know what the expectations of our community are as far as what kids should leave middle school with, what skills and what they should leave, that'll help the committees or the teachers look at curriculum in a different light. I was thinking the CTE committee might be a great place to gather some of that data because they've got representatives from multiple employment places around the community and different stakeholders. So that's kind of where my mind is. I didn't even look at the other two.
That's fine.
Because I think that first one.
It's a different process than we've had. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? So, go ahead.
Did you have something?
I didn't see anyone else that I was going to move on, but I heard you go. So.
Oh, yes. I would. Just a thought. I like what you've done here, and I really hope, this will become part of our meeting notes so that we can refer to it and stuff. Knowing it's not going and it's not ironclad. I really liked, and I was thinking kind of big question before and a big question after, is in the very first slide you talked about personalized learning. It's that lens which the core 4 is flexible content and resource tools. And so that, as we look at curriculum then in a whole different way than we have 5 years ago. So I'm really glad that you brought that out. It should be part of our conversation. I think the other big question is the assessment alignment, that we don't really necessarily have good assessments that are noted on here that are necessarily aligned with that we know are aligned with our curriculum. Mm-hmm. And so at some point we'll need to look at that and see whether indeed they are aligned.
So, right, and as you said, one of the things that we've looked at in terms of the 6-year curriculum management model is defining what happens in each year. So right now we have the model that's adopted in the AR administrative regulation is like you do research, you implement, and then you have like 4 years that are sort of an M, which means like, I don't know what the M means, right? So trying to sort of identify, and I talked to the last 2 years I've been calling curriculum, that's like a cold call and curriculum director across the country. You're in Minnesota and you don't know me, but I'm looking at your website and I have these questions. So, models that have so after they implement, they do a evaluation. Did it work the way we wanted to? Did the materials work? Where are we at? Most of them in that next year then look at how are we going to assess the success. And so a lot of places have teacher created assessments. So third grade teachers will say we're going to do a December and April benchmark on social studies or reading and get an idea of are we where we need to be. So there's a lot of different models out there. So I wasn't sure if you were just yawning. You be careful yawning, I'll call on you, Ernest. Go ahead.
Just a question, and not to spend a lot of time on it, but as you called around districts that might be using personalized, what I was just thinking is when we talk about curriculum and grade levels mm-hmm. or stuff like that, and so our assessments, we're not really necessarily going by grade. That you will have mastery at this grade, though we tend to write curriculum often to be that, but it might be an ongoing process.
It really varies, and places. The state of New Hampshire has gone on the secondary level to a competency-based model. If you look, they have this Education 2.0, the New Hampshire model, where what they've said is before you get through 12th grade, you have to show that you have these competencies. And then districts are sort of deciding what classes that they're going to make to make sure that kids have that competency. And as I've talked to some people in different places, especially with personalized learning, they're sort of taking it as by 3rd grade, you should see kids being able to do, or by 6th grade, we should kind of be here. And even places that have fully implemented sort of personalized learning tend to have pacing guides, because you want to know that if we're just going through with our normal everyday kind of kid, we want to make sure that it's realistic to get through the curriculum. And if we're giving them, if there's no way to get through it in 18 weeks, then it's too much. So they tend to be, and then the other feedback we get is that you don't want to let a student stay in Unit 1 until Christmas. So there's pacing guides and those kind of things as well. It doesn't look as different as you think it does. It just tends to have some assessment pieces. Ms. Stewart.
Now, are they using district curriculum, or are they using standards?
It depends. So, for example, in our district, our math curriculum is simply the state Alaska math standards that are adopted by grade. There's nothing extra. It's just the adopted state standards. In English language arts, they're the state standards plus extra stuff that our English teachers felt they wanted to include. So it depends. So part of the challenge will be looking at what's our language going to be. Because even with English language arts and social studies, there's a lot of standards. So the other thing is looking at, do we want kids to master, all 80 of them? Or are we going to say really these 20 that are the most important? And then what do we call those?
What are other states using?
It really varies.
So,
yeah.
That is the issue.
Yeah.
We're military, and so that is such a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
That's to come from, especially reading and writing, and to have such differences is between, not you're talking about schools in your district, but I'm talking about state to state.
Right.
It's such a frustration for the kids to either come in behind or coming in ahead is just as big of a frustration.
Yeah.
Because you might not have something that's, last year it was 2 years difference in the English.
Wow.
My son was like, yeah, I learned that in 5th grade.
So,
And that's so frustrating to him. And so I guess I have a question about, I don't know what Core 4 is.
Okay.
And I want to know, when you're talking about standards, is that state standards, or like, are we talking, I can't think of the word.
Common Core?
Common Core.
So in Alaska, Alaska likes to do things its own way. So our Alaska state standards in math and English language arts are 98% identical to the Common Core.
Okay.
So there are a few differences in terms of, in math is time and place, and there's
More at the elementary level in math, there's like one thing in the middle school, and our high school standards are the exact same.
are exact. So in English language arts and math, it's pretty standard. Where it gets tricky is social studies and science. We've just adopted in our district, our curriculum is based on the NGSS, which is like Common Core for science. And the state of Alaska is in the process of going through new science standards adoptions. But I really appreciate your voice. I just want to, I think that's one of the big challenges is how do we make sure that we're not penalizing students for grown-up decisions. I mean, as much as possible, we want to make sure that we're not putting up barriers for kids based on grown-up decisions. So I think that perspective, I'm really glad you're here and can share that. I have 2 coordinators in my office who are both military, and it's really great because I'm from Alaska. I've taught in this district for a long time, so it's nice to hear those outside voices for us to remember that we have a lot of different populations to serve. So I appreciate that. And I can get you, so our district is 2.5 years ago, started an initiative called Personalized Learning. And really the goal, from my perspective, is looking at how do we look at teaching and learning from a student-centered perspective. So how are we meeting the needs of the students and removing barriers that we might have as a system? And then, giving them some flexibility for students who need either to go faster, to go slower, some of those to make that happen. We've adopted a model that uses what's called the Core 4, and I can send you some information. It's also on our website. And basically, it's thinking about instruction through data-informed, data-driven decisions. So let's use data. If we know a kid has learned it and already knows it, why do we want to make them sit through it again? Like that kind of. Or if we know they don't know it, it's targeted instruction.
Flexible content, data-driven decisions, student reflection, and ownership.
Yeah, and I can I can call if you want to talk sometime.
Get it on the website.
Yeah.
Okay.
And hopefully, if you said to your children's teachers that tell me about personalized learning in the Core 4 at your school, they should be able to tell you what they're doing in their school. That relates to that. So as Mr. Doran said, I want to make sure that what we're doing on this end aligns with what the teachers are doing on the classroom level. I think there's sort of been a disconnect. Great. Okay, we got 15 minutes. Anything else? I will put this into a PDF and have Jen send out as well, so you can see that. But if you have thoughts, please feel free to share them. And I just wanted you sort of to think about how our curriculum processes might need to shift or might not. Like I say, with a lot of this, I don't have an end game yet. I'm just figuring it out. So the next item is talking about actually the revisions that are up for this year. So in 2018 and 19, next 2 weeks, I think, we'll be starting to look at some of our CTE clusters. And so unlike our content areas like English and math and science, with career and technical education, there are 16 national clusters that are sort of job groups. So we have a health science cluster, a transportation cluster, engineering is a cluster. And because CTE is funded differently by the state and by the federal government, they have a 5-year revision cycle. It's a little bit different, and they have some different requirements. So we are going to be starting work on our career education clusters for transportation, which in our district is right now we have a heavy equipment maintenance program at Hutchison. We have small engines programs at North Pole and at Hutch. We have structural body, they do a body shop, so it's those kind of things. And then a consumer auto, basic auto as well. So that group will look at their curriculum, and they are required to align to national requirements for having a certification and for having kids line up to get a certificate at the end. And then the other one, and we're actually going to do these two together, are information technology and then STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we're going to be sort of tackling that. We have engineering programs at a couple of our schools. We have a program at Hutchison where students are getting Cisco systems certified. So trying to look at making sure that, and really with CTE it's a matter of are the standards that we're using the current national standards, because it changes so frequently. We want to make sure that our kids are getting the current stuff. So that process will be started. And then, as I said, in January, we're hoping to start, the plan is to start secondary language arts and then K-12 social studies. So in terms of bringing work back to this committee, it's a pretty light fall, because work isn't even going to be starting on CTE until we're meeting with the CTE department, I think, 2 weeks from now, and then the teachers will actually be coming in November to sort of start that process of looking at what the national standards are. So we will have, our hope will be that we have a revised CTE curriculum to bring to this committee probably in March. So that we'll, as they get a draft out, which could happen as soon as January, it will sort of depend on when they get it done, with a hopeful adoption in May. But then language arts and social studies will not come up for adoption to this committee until next year. So it's a light year in terms of curriculum that is actually going through and being adopted. So questions about the revisions or plans for this year?
So nobody is requesting to teach a new class?
Pardon?
Nobody's requesting to teach a new class?
The pilot process that we have right now actually starts, schools turn them in November, but it's not to teach a class until next year. So we'll see how that works. Typically, pilots haven't come to this committee, and oftentimes because they're not approved by the board. A pilot is approved by the superintendent for a set period of time, and then we evaluate it at the end to say, do we want to roll this over to a curriculum or not? So it will be interesting to see if we get some of those, and I definitely, depending on how the timelines work at our meetings, is that something that we'll share to see where that goes. And that's a process that I would like to, as I said on the slides, I want to be able to have schools respond to needs of students. So if they see a hole or a need, academic need for their students, it would be nice, and they have a spot to do it, that we could make that happen, as opposed to saying, great idea, hang on to it for a year and a half, and if you have staffing, we'll revisit that. So I'd like to make that process a little bit faster, but that's going to require school board approval. Okay, so that is the agenda. We have general comments and questions, and for the new people, how we usually do this is we just go around, and all of the members, if you have something to general comment, general question for the good of the order, you can share that. I would like us to consider whether or not we want to meet in November and December. So from my point of view, I will have nothing sort of to bring you. Even the work on the curriculum process we're not going to see a lot of change between now and November and the first Tuesday in November in terms of the things I shared with you. Are not going to change much. We're still trying to even figure out how to get things up on the web. We won't have a curriculum to revise. So my suggestion would be not to meet in November, and then to look at whether or not we want to meet in December. But that is,
Well, there's the next K-12 magnet meeting is also scheduled for the 1st.
Oh.
Just like tonight's was. So
that's a good.
Yeah, so I was looking at my calendar going, oh, I'd like to go to that meeting, but.
And for those of you who aren't aware, our district, so one of our school board priorities on the current strategic plan is to look at expanding options and choices for families. As such, the board has talked about looking at magnet schools. Barnett Middle School or Barnett Elementary Middle School is our only magnet school right now, and parents have expressed they really like the magnet school model. So there's exploration going around a possible K-12 magnet school. And so those meetings are open to the public. They're looking for input. So, that November 1st is their next K-12 magnet meeting. And so.
There's one actually in 2 weeks, too. People.
Oh, okay.
There's
so
one on the 18th.
I'm going to defer to Tara, so fill us in.
Well, so there's one on the 18th. So there's one happening right now. So you'll have to catch up. They'll send out notes if you can get updates. But their next one's on the 18th. I'm pretty sure, and then the 1st, right? Yeah,
No,
the 18th.
Or 18th today, October 18th, November 1st, and November 15th.
Yeah.
And we can send out information on the K-12 if you're interested and aren't familiar with it. We'll send you the link so you can check that out. I'll also make sure that we send the slides from today if folks wanted those. So,
I would like to not be done.
I don't. It's not on the agenda, but I'm not exactly sure my Robert's Rules of Order is rusty in terms of how we might go about that. But I would say let's go around through comments and questions, and if somebody, if it's expressed that we want to not meet in November, we can take a vote on that at the end of the meeting before we adjourn. So, does that make sense? Okay. So, Ms. Addis, let's start with you.
Hey.
Yes. Comments or questions?
Comment. I would rather not meet for a meeting just to meet for a meeting if we don't have anything to talk about. I'm fine with waiting for that. Other than that, I do know that Alaska became a state in 1959. It is the 49th state. Anyway, my brain was going.
We get it. It's late at night.
I do know that. That's it. That's my only comment.
All right, Mr. Vaughn.
I would just second that about the meetings. I don't see the need to have to come in and meet if there's not going to be curriculum for us to look at. And I would really like to go to the other meeting on the 1st. So.
Okay. Mr. Guy.
Same thing with the meeting. No point in time. It's your meeting. We don't. Other than that, just happy to be here. Excited about some of the things that we've already started talking about, and look forward to continuing those conversations as we move forward.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, we're glad you're here for your first meeting. Ms. Seymour, you're not really on the committee, so I'm going to skip you.
Please do.
All right. Ms. Stewart.
No comment.
I agree with skipping the next meeting, and I also want to say that I appreciate being able to be here.
I appreciate, and you're welcome to bring an adorable 7-week-old anytime. So he's very well behaved.
There's a vacancy on the committee.
Yeah. We don't have an age limit, right?
Yeah, there you go.
He won't talk much. So, Mr. Peterson.
Okay, so there's nothing of substance that apparently we're going to do until next year with regard to any of the areas of curriculum. But this committee is at a new threshold. We reformed ourselves since last spring, and we're taking on this idea of what should be the approach to doing curriculum. Visited tonight this idea that there are these 3 driving questions, and I think that while we have no substantive business to review, at least until the spring semester, this is our opportunity to shape the process. And I think that it would be a disservice to those that we represent and what we're supposed to be doing were we to jettison both meetings. I understand the conflicts with the first, and that does make some sense. But I think that historically, December has always been, we'll see. But if we really want to shape the process before we jump back into the substance of each particular curriculum, like we will with language arts and social studies and CTE stuff, then we should have some better ideas about what we think the community involvement and the roles that those people will have off that first question. What particularly the third question is, and that is how to address the knowledge and the skills. And I think that, again, it's our responsibility as a committee to have some idea about how to approach the substance of curriculum with a reasoned procedural set of notions. And so it would be my suggestion that we in fact meet on December 6th. That gives Ms. Hadaway a chance to, over the next almost 2 months, put together some thoughts on those things. Gives us that chance. We can all go to the other meeting on November 1st. But it gives us a chance to meet again and discuss those 3 questions. Because I think that it's those 3 questions that at least the staff are using to drive the work that they're doing. And if that's going to be the case, then we need to have some either answers or some direction to provide so that when we do hit the review process for language arts and social studies and CTE, we're all approaching it from the same procedural perspectives. And so I would encourage us to skip November 1st, but meet on December 6th, come whatever weather's out there, but dedicate that meeting to addressing fully those procedural aspects of what those 3 things are. And if we can get some common thoughts, ideas, or common direction, then I think we'll be better served come January and February when we are looking at what books to teach, what subjects to include or not to include, or, better yet, how the learning and unlearning process for Toffler should apply to each of those things. So I think skip November 1st is fine, but come back December 1st and be prepared to discuss the process. Because that's our chance, and probably our only chance, at the front end, to shape how this committee thinks versus what should be included. Because from here on out, it is all about what should be included. I mean, I harken back to 8 years ago when I was on this committee, and everything was about what should be included. And we literally looked at what goes in this class. Should we be teaching that? Yes, no. You remember those days.
I do.
But now we're looking at what is the process for teaching? What should be the mechanisms for giving our teachers the biggest toolkit and giving our students those things that are going to make them productive members of our society. So this is where we set the tone for what this committee is going to be for a long time. Because we are reinventing ourselves. So December 6th, I think we can meet for that.
And I'll just say, just quickly, because we're at time, and I'm really trying to respect that. So that by December 6th, there will be, we could definitely form some work session sort of thing, so you guys have a chance to sort of dig in and do that.
Okay.
Yeah. So that would be an option. Mr. Kincaid.
I step or
Okay.
skip November, but December would be nice to tackle those questions. This time to talk about it.
Okay. And I 7 o'clock, but if you guys will give us, I think we can finish in just a couple minutes, and we'll vote on the meetings if you don't mind sticking around for just a minute, because sorry about that. Mr. Doran, did you have comments before we?
Yep, I got 2. One, I'm not going to repeat Earl's comments because I think you outlined them well, because I do think we have the overarching personal learning lens that we need that will form guidance, advice to guidance to committees later on, developing curriculum, and how we look at it when it comes back to us. And I think that's a big piece. Well, eligible. The other piece I'd like to just toss out, and I will post this after our meeting if anybody wants to stay, is come to the board's attention. We're going to be looking at homework policy in all probability at the next board meeting that came to our attention last week. Policy committee talked about it last night. I think it's a curriculum related area, at least. And I would appreciate any feedback or thoughts on homework that you would be willing to share with me, and I'll stick around to do that. But I think it is an important piece that has impacts and it's a broad-based opportunity for input. So if you have any thoughts on it, I would love to get them, or you can't stay tonight, send me an email. I would really, really appreciate it. We need to look at what that is and how it impacts student learning, teachers, parents. There's a lot of different aspects of it that are curricular related, so stick around.
All right. So if I have a motion, we will I heard the will of the committee is to skip the November meeting and plan on meeting December 6th, come weather or not. If I would entertain a motion to let the minutes show that. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor. This will be to skip the November meeting and to say we're meeting in December. Please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, that will be our plan, and Jennifer and I will send out information. With that being said, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ms. Claire. Is there a second?
Me.
All right. Seeing no objection, thank you for staying an extra 2 minutes. I appreciate it, guys. Let me know if you have thoughts on the process as we go forward, and we'll go from there.
Can you send us those 3 questions?
I will send you the slides. I will
cool.
send you some information on the K-12 meeting that will be happening on November 1, since you guys don't want to miss the Thursday night meeting. And I'll send some personalized learning stuff as well, and you give me a call. So, all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.